evening and welcome to the coffee table once again. It's a Saturday. Lahore has been nice and sunny all day. There is less pollution, at least visibly. Still coughing my lungs out, and I'm sure Doc is too.
I don't agree.
So today,
but we'll let that go today.
We'll let that go today. So for some reason, it has been slightly better. I don't know what the reason is. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, which is aid, right, and donor behavior or donor attitudes and our own attitude. So we have with us a young man, Hussain Nadeem, who's just submitted his thesis for political. He's a student of political science. He's doing his PhD at the University of Sydney. And while we were off camera, we were just talking about, what the subject of his interest was, and it is about the intersection
of security and development.
Yeah. An interesting one, right?
But Hussain, more importantly, Faisal, was also the advisor to the Minister of Planning in the last government, Hassan Iqbal.
Yeah.
And he worked in the Planning Commission for a long time, taught at NAST. And he knows the aid industry very well because he's worked with the aid industry.
Right. Before we go into it, I was to first congratulate you. You got $3 billion.
Oh yeah, of course.
This came in yesterday.
In fact, I was listening.
So all your scenarios of doom and gloom and everything else, money's
have come crashing. Yes. Absolutely correct.
How do you answer
Faisal, let me answer that. I was watching all the television shows last night, and people were in euphoria. $3 billion has come in.
Yeah.
People are so happy at $3 billion coming in, and people are so happy at the Saudis giving us something. I think A, we are hungry for friends, and B, somehow whenever money comes in, we congratulate ourselves. Hussain, is that true?
I think that's true, and that represents a very sort of post-colonial mindset. The idea that somehow Pakistan is getting isolated, it is kind of contradictory to that. So the congratulation part isn't because somehow the money is going to change our situation, but I feel that the congratulations is part and parcel.
There were two things he touched on. One was the money, and the other he said, we're so happy we have a few friends.
We're happy that we have friends. And I think that specific point is more amplified because for the last decade or so, constantly being reminded that we're getting isolated. So the money coming into Pakistan is kind of like a reassurance
But
that
at the
somehow...
moment, we also are looking for money. We're looking for $12 to $15 billion, depending on the calculation that you believe.
True.
We need $12 to $15 billion to fill our immediate financing gap. 3 years down the road, we need even more money. Every year, for the next 3-4 years, we need money. The government is keen that we should not go to the IMF, but we should go and beg as much money as we can.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you in the Planning Commission, I'm sure you're used to begging for money. I did that too.
That was being
I'm
done
ashamed to say.
at the Ministry of
Is that
Finance.
what the Planning Commission does?
That's the Ministry of Finance job
officially.
Ministry of Finance's job, we follow them.
We only plan stuff.
But now you tell me that our aid utilization is not that great. I remember we are celebrating CPEC now. We used to celebrate Kerry Lugar Bill in 2010 or 11. We got $7.5 billion. And from what you tell me, we didn't get the money or we got the money?
That's a very interesting thing that you raised because of the $7.5 billion, and this is according to the Inspector General Office of the United States of Aid.
You mean the Aid Inspector General within the US, their own office?
In 2016, they published a report and they clearly say that out of the $7.5 billion committed to Pakistan, only 3.5 was actually allocated to the United States of Aid.
So they committed the money, but what they sent out was 3.5.
No. There's a funny part in that. Yeah. The commitment is something else. It's 7.5. Allocation is actually the money they're going to allocate, which was $3.5 billion. And of the $3.5 billion, only 1.8 was actually dispersed on ground.
Are you serious?
So
out of 7.5,
this is not me.
This is that we think we only got 1.8 million.
1.8, and now when we go deeper into the 1.8, that's where the overhead costs, the corruption.
So how many the consultants took back?
The consultant took back and all that.
40 cents on the dollar?
Barely. Barely that. So eventually what we're talking about is, when we talk about this entire discourse around the idea that billions and billions of dollars are coming to Pakistan, the aid on ground is negligible.
So what did we get from the Kerry Lugar Bill? 1.8 was disbursed. We got how much?
Well, my PhD thesis looks into this specific impact, and I talk about how the political aspects of Kerry Lugar-Berman Act under this entire discourse of billions of dollars, we eventually ended up, like Imran Khan Saab says, we ended up becoming a hire gun for the United States because they're pushing us in a discourse that, look, we're giving you so much money. We need these and immediate things. And here's a very interesting part. When the Kerry Lugar bill was being signed, the United States officially said that this is not just a 5-year project. There is a potential to enhance it.
But Kerry Lugar was non-security. Wasn't that development aid?
There is no such thing as non-security.
There's no such thing as
no such
No, but
thing.
in rhetoric, it was pure grant aid, right?
It was
pure grant aid to help us grow.
You see, it is so funny because when we talk about the rhetoric, we don't go into the little bit of detail on that. Even at that rhetorical level, they talked about that this is for the support of democracy and purely development aid, and we'll separate it from the security aid. When you read the Kerry Lugar bill, it has two parts. It has the development part, and then the second part is the security part. So they're eventually meshing up the security and develop in a sort of legislation which they're calling to be separating the security and development. So the rhetoric and practice are two different things over here.
So it's a different way of writing it up.
It's a different way of writing it up. And the way they have further put the conditions on it, I was very surprised that the bill was actually accepted and approved in Pakistan because the language itself, the way they're asking you to curb a certain civil military ties, etc., it is extremely, I mean, it is attacking your sovereignty.
There was a lot of controversy about the Kerry Lugar bill even when it was being discussed. Right? There was yes and there was no, and then I think they came here and there were some discussions, and this is the result, right? So we went through all the hoops and we just got 1.8. Tell me something. You always make this difference. Why is IMF money good and Saudi and UAE money bad?
Oops.
Money is money.
What do you think, Hussain?
I think you're probably a better expert on this, but I think IMF has become a sort of stigma in the post-colonial states. There is a sort of political connotations attached to IMF. I mean, this is one of the things that I wrote in my thesis as well, that I interviewed over 80 officials, civil military officials in Pakistan, and it's very interesting. The moment you talk about imperialism and neocolonialism, the automatic idea it comes into their mind is the British and the
Let's
West.
define that a bit. Let's define post-colonialism. And let's define imperialism.
It's very hard to define nowadays. I mean, there is no specific definition. If somebody says that post-colonialism is a specific framework, it's not. It's a bunch of different things. Similar is with the imperialism. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we think about imperialism or neocolonialism or influence for that matter, we tend to think American aid or anything else. But when you look at CPEC, the same discourse is not peddled.
I know, absolutely. I was
CPEC,
going to come there.
The Chinese aid, the Saudi aid, somehow it is not considered as imperial or in the same lens of the post-colonial lens. So it's okay then because we have a certain inclination.
But is it okay?
It's not okay. I mean, at the discursive level, it helps the political brass.
But you see, to answer your question, Faisal, I think the IMF aid is better or different in a sense. Because IMF is an international body, even though the Western powers have most of the vote there, but we are contributors. It's a club. We've contributed to the club. We are members of the club. And it's got a very specific purpose. The purpose is, as I keep saying, it's the emergency ward. It's supposed to help us when we go under. So that's good, fair enough. And the IMF money is very cheap. It comes at below market prices or very close to market.
Because all the conditionalities, right?
The conditionalities, a lot is made of conditionality. But think about it this way. If you go to the emergency ward, let's say you've got some, let's say my favorite example, my leg broken. There is a conditionality. The conditionality is...
We've done about 3 programs on this one.
I wear a cast, I get myself treated, etc. So that's conditionality. So when the IMF comes with conditionality, it's not bad conditionality. It's medicine that we must take.
I'm talking in the context of the cost of money.
Right? Cost of money is very cheap.
So
cost of money is less than market.
Is that a single dimensional cost?
It is.
Right?
It is.
So we look at just the rate at which it is being...
It's a rate, but the medicine, all I'm saying is the medicine is something that any economist, good economist, not a bad economist, good economist would agree to, that you have to do this.
All right,
and if you don't agree to that, then you can talk to the IMF, negotiate.
So I have one question on the specific impact. When you talk about this conditionality and the plaster that you're talking about, I'm assuming that this is their way of telling you that you need to fix certain aspects of your economy and structural reforms. What's stopping the government of Pakistan from doing this? This is one of the questions I'm asking because when we were in the government, and it was very embarrassing for us that a lot of times the donors would tell us that you need to educate your women, you need to educate your children, you need to have a polio vaccination drive. For us, it was kind of embarrassing. Why is it that the government of Pakistan is not undertaking structural reforms? Is it political? I mean, there is a political capital.
Because I think the democracy we claim to have, we don't have. Right?
I would answer it in two ways. One is political, but I think the deeper problem is our own capacity to understand. Quite frankly, we cannot understand the reform that we need. We are looking after a post-colonial government, which is not post-colonial. We've got colonial government. The colonial structures are still alive. You may call it post-colonial, but the civil service, the bureaucracy, judiciary is still totally the same as the colonial left it. Changing it is not an easy thing, Hussain, as you know. We could write 20 PhD theses on this. How the hell do we change it? Unless we have a cerebral thinking government, you can't change it. This thing, our approach is that we can wave a magic wand and make things happen. You and I both know, Faisal, if you had to build a house, it'll take you a year or two to build.
It'll take a while.
It takes time to build things. Then you really need architects, structural engineers to make you. We don't have anything. What do we do?
We're talking about aid. We're talking about a country. We're talking about ourselves. We're talking about our addiction to aid. Right from the very beginning. Right, we've been dependent on money that is given to us under one pretext or the other. Right. So why is it that in 71 plus years we have not been able to understand?
Can I ask just point one thing on this? When we talk about the addiction to aid and the dependency on aid, we need to really examine: are we really dependent on aid? Do we have an aid dependency?
We shouldn't have dependence.
How much of the aid is actually the percent of our GDP?
I think he has an answer in his mind.
How much is the aid actually the percent of GDP? It's barely anything. It's
not even 2%.
It cannot make you, it cannot break you. So the only problem that I think, and I mentioned in my thesis, is that we have amplified the debate on aid for reasons which is still unknown. But I think what actually the aid is doing, it's feeding your political establishment in the military elite. I'm sorry, but the political military establishment.
So there's another dimension that we are going to discuss.
The actual people on ground, the policies, the economy, it's not getting anything from the aid at all. It's the political class that is actually benefiting from the aid because it drives a certain sort of political capital and corruption.
So it's extractive politics then.
Right? No, but hang on. I have to question that a little. I take your point that aid money that we get is not that much. But I think the way it gets amplified, as you're saying, it gets amplified because it keeps a political elite alive and a certain system alive. Fair enough. But I think it goes a little further. It also feeds us the policy dimensions that we need to take. Our system, I think over the 71 years that Faisal is talking, our system has stopped thinking. Our civil service, our universities, our thinking establishment, parliament. I mean, if you look at it, Faisal, I don't think I've seen a single report come out of parliament in the last 10 years.
It won't.
I have seen no report coming out of the civil service, right?
Because you want opacity. You don't want transparency.
And they tell us to make a BISP, we make it. They tell us to make this, we make it.
They tell you to do 18th Amendment and you do it. I'm completely for 18th Amendment. But the very fact that it is being dictated to you is kind of problematic then, because it's not driven by the local need.
So now the problem is that why did we lose our own capacity? And then the next issue is, which I want you to still work.
That really goes all the way back to what the Muslim League was, what the Congress was, what happened in 47.
Absolutely.
Why did
No, that's not quite correct. That's not quite correct. I think about it. Hussain, what do you think?
Were we even prepared in 1947?
No,
right? We suddenly...
No, we were prepared in the sense we were... I know partition caught us unawares and we had... But do think about something. We managed to contain the situation immediately after partition, which was a very violent situation. We managed to contain it very well. We managed to contain the food shortages. We managed to develop Guddu Barrage, Ghulam Muhammad Barrage on our own. We managed to patch together an irrigation system. We had a broken education system. We managed to put it together.
So where did it all go off the rails?
That's what I'm trying to say.
We're going to come back to this. We're going to take a short break and we're going to come back to this. So we're going to talk about where we went off the rails. So we're going to take a short break. During the break, I'm going to stoke a little more and see what I can get out of Dr. Nadeem. So do take a break, have a cup of coffee and come back and join us. Welcome back. So things were just beginning to really, gestate and heat up. So, Dr. Nadeem, right, back to you. You are always talking about our lack of capacity, that we do not have the intellectual prowess, we do not have enough discourse or discussion, we have really no understanding, right, of how we are supposed to change things around, governance structures, the political structure and all that, and how everything is dictated by donors. Right? So let's pick it up from there.
Very correct.
Said right in the beginning we were fine, we were all right.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We managed to save a deathly situation. 2 million people killed on the borders.
Yeah.
Extreme
Large
shortages.
number of refugees.
Extreme shortages.
Yeah,
Our
extreme
supply lines totally cut.
Yeah.
Right? We managed to save that situation and totally on our own capacity. I sometimes marvel, and my older generation has died, and I used to tell them I should video them because, quite frankly, their secrets are gone. No secret, but
we haven't documented anything?
Nothing. They did some remarkable work in terms of building this infrastructure and keeping the situation together.
Yeah.
And I must compliment them on this. Maybe we should remember them at this occasion on that. But the thing is, right now, unfortunately, and I remember Kirmani Saab was a very famous irrigation engineer who masterminded some of these things. I met him in Washington and I asked him, I said, Kirmani Saab, what happened now? And he said, our irrigation department is totally decimated.
Right.
They cannot now manage the canal system, and we have one of the largest and the best irrigation systems in the world. So, sir, please tell me, we received 1.8 billion. Of the 1.8 billion, you say we received $400 or $500 million, right? Where did the rest of the billion go?
It's a very complicated question. I mean, there are overhead costs. Then there
Overhead costs of whose?
the consultant fees are there.
The people who
administrative
get
costs.
the aid
So the
approved.
USAID is not given
So if
to
you
us.
look-
Please describe how this
So if
happens.
you look at the USAID website specifically where they have the entire data, they have millions of dollars in administrative costs. And it doesn't have any details. It just says administrative cost. And there's a big chunk which goes into the security costs of the development aid workers. So if you have hired a Blackwater firm or any firm, you're paying in
They're
millions of
heavily
dollars.
insured,
Exactly.
paid
So
huge
that's
salaries.
one aspect. But the bigger impact, the bigger aspect is specifically when I was working in the government was that the amount of money that was being doled out to the consultants that were being hired.
And the consultants are US consultants, not
The
our
US
consultants.
The US consultants. Our consultants also get hired. They also get paid extravagantly.
They get paid junior fees. The American firms get the contracts.
Yeah.
We get
The subcontracting.
The
We
chief
get
of party is
subcontracted
always
staff.
from there.
Always the
It's the
American.
deputy
But I'll
chief
just
of
give you
party
an
who may be
example.
from
I mean, I
there.
won't name a firm, but for 1 week of work, 25 to 30,000.
You're talking about the Beltway bandits.
Exactly.
The
Five
Beltway
of them.
bandits, exactly.
The Beltway
Now, can you please describe the Beltway bandits?
The
What are
Beltway
they?
bandits is this ring around Washington where they have their offices
Right.
within the
Yeah.
Beltway, which runs around Washington. And these are the companies that actually take a big chunk out of those aid funds which are approved through Congress, through the Ways and Means Committee.
This is
and
very
all that,
interesting
right?
because the aid moves out from the USAID office on Pennsylvania Avenue on the other side of the Potomac
Yeah.
to the Reston or Virginia
Yeah.
to the contractors.
Yeah.
It never actually gets to be in Pakistan. It's just transferred from there to there. So it is. I mean,
It does move a
I
few
don't like to-
kilometers, huh?
Exactly. I don't like to blame entirely on the donors, but they have they have the particular agenda. That's how they operate. My real question is, what exactly are we doing? Now, I work with the government, we've interacted with the donors. It's not that the donors are shoving things upon us. A lot of times it is us
But
requesting
that
us to
supports
do
and
the job.
strengthens what he's saying.
Exactly.
Because we
Right.
don't have the capacity.
I don't even know if we don't have. We do have the capacity. I mean, I'll give you a very small example on this. You ask any grade 17, 18, 19 officer in the government of Pakistan to send out emails for official work.
Yeah.
They can't do that. You ask them to operate all sorts of websites and emails for personal usage. They're doing that completely well. It's just the ability, whether we incentivize them or not, whether there is a sort of,
So there is a gap.
there is a certain gap.
And that gap does not seem to be in terms of ability.
It's not
That
ability.
gap seems to be in commitment, perception, all these other things.
Ability has different layers. I mean, I agree with Dr. Saab when he says we don't have extraordinary experts on critical subjects. We may have very few of that, but we do have a large chunk of people who have ability, average or above average ability to deliver on certain things. My question is that segment, even that segment is not delivering.
Yeah.
What's the reason that the people who can deliver on a particular things, basic report writing, basic ability to implement reforms, they're not able to implement
But
reforms?
my question is, if let's say I'm a grade 18, 19, 20 official sitting in the Planning Commission, I write a report. Who's going to read it?
Exactly. There is no reason for you to write it there.
Will any cabinet member read it? Will any parliamentary member read it? Will the Prime Minister read it?
This is one of the things that a grade 19 officer once told me when I was interviewing for the PhD thesis. He said that, look, the only way to actually secure your career in the government is by doing nothing. The moment you start doing something, it causes an anxiety around the officers, and then it is open to criticism. You become vulnerable. So the safest way to get promotions is actually to have a clean slate. Now, when the mentality is there, and this is not one person who was saying, this was a mainstream
This is a
idea.
culture.
This is a culture. Now, when you have this sort of mentality, it's not that they don't want to work. Half of the people in the government, they're working 3 to 4 hours, and they have their own property shops set up.
But Hussain,
where they're using the government funds to run the
we go
property.
there, Faisal, let me also tell you.
Yes.
I used to work for the IMF.
Yeah.
My incentive structure was very simple. I had to rise in the IMF hierarchy.
Yeah.
So whenever I came to a country like Pakistan, well, I've been to many countries, my job was to produce a report on Pakistan for my headquarters.
country report.
For my headquarters.
Yeah.
You guys didn't matter. Sorry, I apologize, but you guys didn't matter. I didn't want to talk to you guys.
I know we don't
right?
matter.
I only wanted to get your information.
You're the economic hitman. Why should
Simple,
we matter?
simple.
We are the victims.
Exactly.
We are the intended
Exactly.
targets.
So think about it. Who cares about the victims, right?
Yeah.
So I used to talk to all the best people. I mean, this is standard. This is standard operating. I'm not talking about mine. Standard operating procedure is you find a Hussain Nadeem sitting in the planning commission, a bright young kid who
And
knows
you
everything.
pick his brains.
I pick his brains.
Yes,
I
that
feed my
I've seen
report.
even.
Yeah.
I see that even at our innovation center.
Everywhere.
Right?
Right? So, but the more important thing is, I pick his brains, but I don't say I picked his brains.
You don't even
This is
Yeah, of
all
course.
my job, my work,
course,
right?
of course,
I'm
of
the
course.
great wizard.
So you're the
great wizard. who
You're the
solved-
consultant, the expert who's actually come to help him.
Yeah.
So you're actually helping him by picking his brains.
And he, poor guy. So, the second thing that I want to do, which is also very important, please, I'm building up a point. Second thing I want to do is I must see the Prime Minister or the Minister. I must see somebody important because my back to office must say,
Yeah.
I was treated with respect and I met
I was
all the
punching
best
way
people.
above my weight.
Right, way above my weight, right? And secondly, I've got a report that will impress headquarters back there.
Right.
And the ministers must sign on to my agenda.
Sure.
So I have tools to do that. I can carry the minister to Washington,
Yep.
give him a full paid trip.
Yep.
I can even hire his son or nephew for, some work in Washington.
Yep.
Isn't that one way that we buy into the government?
That's exactly one of the ways we buy into buy influence. I mean, the other way is to actually start directly funding NGOs of political parties, NGOs of politicians. And I mean, USA data is full of that. I mean, you have policy forums and small
Apparently,
NGOs,
wives of certain people have
wives
been,
of some people who are receiving $500,000 while they're serving in the government as senators, MNAs, etc.
We've been hearing about that.
It is there. I mean, the problem is that nobody's
now the
questioning.
question is,
And I'll just
Conflict of
complete-
interest rears its head again.
It's conflict of interest, but my question is, which I've been pondering over and I've been scratching out, that you have tons of intellectuals over here writing on Dawn News, the news, sitting on the TV. Why is that nobody's calling them out? So I try to flesh a little bit deeper and try to see the background of the public intellectuals, so to speak of. A lot of them are actually also receiving fundings from the donor agencies. So what is exactly happening is that the people,
think tanks,
the think tankers, the public intellectuals who need to be calling out on the right things and the wrong things, they're also getting paid by the donor organization. So eventually they're buying out silence.
Right.
Now I'm not blaming those
So
individuals.
we've sketched out a landscape where we know where the problems lie, right? So where do we go from here? How do we change things?
No,
is
we
there
haven't fleshed
any-
it out.
We haven't
No,
fleshed it out.
we have
Not
no
as
idea.
yet.
We've barely
No,
gonna-
no,
we've touched the surface
There's
right
no
now.
idea. Okay.
Think
Let's
about
dive
it.
deep then.
Can you tell Faisal? I mean,
Yeah.
he needs to understand. He's been too much in the private sector. We are talking about the official sector.
We're talking about the
Private sector. You guys have different games. We have different games.
Okay.
Think about it. All these contractors, the so-called contractors, the Beltway bandits as you call them, now they are beyond Beltway. They're also in England. They're also in Australia. They're all over the place. What do they have in common? They've never done any work outside the aid industry.
Aid industry.
Yeah.
I agree.
They only work for the aid industry, right? And the procedures are so complicated that only they can bid for it. A Pakistani firm, even if we make a Pakistani firm with
the
AK,
language
with
can only be understood by them.
Absolutely. The language and the requirements. For example, you could work, AK Sen could win the Nobel Prize. But in a Pakistani firm, he would still not be eligible to compete because his firm has not competed in 10 contracts before. His Nobel Prize is worthless, doesn't count for anything, right? So given that, now these contractors are getting everything under the sun, right? They get huge contracts. Can you tell me the size of the contract that one of these firms gets?
It's everywhere, starting from $50,000 up till $50 million. I mean,
I've seen $200 million. I've seen a
bigger than
contract for
that.
$200 million.
For Pakistan, at least that. I mean,
Right.
we've seen bigger contracts, small contracts. It's all over the place.
One firm gets a $300 million contract. It's renewed all under the covers. In fact, if we take the names of the firms, I don't know whether we can or not, if we take the names of the firms, nobody in Pakistan has heard of these firms, even though they've operated here for the last 20, 30 years. Nobody knows the names of the firms.
Yep.
Is that right?
I agree.
Do people know the names of the firms? Did your survey
They
people
would be
know the names of the
bandits if you
firms?
knew about them, wouldn't they?
They're absolute. They're sitting there. They've got these chiefs of party who get $500,000 a year, and they're sitting there. I mean, it's amazing, right?
It's what we call the development consultant mafia. It's a very specific mafia. You have a very specific set of people. The jobs go around with each other.
That is another element of extractive politics, isn't
It
it?
is,
Right?
it
So
is.
we've created the environment for all this to happen. And we're not the only ones. Many countries around the world, right? They have a similar dilemma.
No, sorry, only the poor countries.
Only the
only Africa and Pakistan.
I don't mean Japan.
Sorry, even India.
Even Japan has the largest borrowing.
Faisal, even India.
Yeah.
India, for example, does not let the aid industry anywhere near the officials.
Yeah.
The aid industry cannot
That's how it should be.
call
There
on the
should be a
deputy
Chinese
chairman
wall.
or the minister as easily. In fact, never.
Yeah.
In fact, India, the
So they don't
senior
have
mo-
access to the
They
Prime
have
Minister.
no access. They can only access grade 20 officials. They can only access joint secretaries. They do not have any access at all to upper levels. They can't dictate policy, nothing. Sorry.
I'll just carry on with
Is
this.
that what Bangladesh is also doing? Because things seem to have changed drastically there.
You tell us.
I have not studied Bangladesh specifically on this, so I'm not sure about that. But to carry on with this specific point about the aid agencies not approaching the officials, in Pakistan, specifically between 2008 and 13, during the Kerry-Lugabaman Act, the Pakistani government officials were officially allowed to have a top-up salary from the donor projects. Can you
is
imagine
serious.
that? So if you have a donor project that you're doing with the government of Pakistan, your secretary or your
So out
joint
of the
secretary, they
few
would get a
hundred-
top-up
Out of the
salary.
few $100 million we finally did get, a big
It
chunk.
went into the salaries and the cars, and it is
The perks and privileges.
you know,
Your favorite.
Exactly.
what we're talking about, and with all due respect to Nadeem Saab as well, he's been talking about this for a very long time.
I know.
People know about this thing. I wrote an article and I got tons of messages and emails about this thing that you should not touch this subject because it is controversial, you'll be crucified. My point is that it's not that nobody knows. We all know the problems. Why is it that? And that's the real question we need to be discussing.
The answer is very obvious. Everybody is a stakeholder.
Everybody
the
is a
ones who are making
stakeholder.
the decisions, right? The ones who are controlling
You know,
the
you
governance
can't
structures,
expect a
they're all
poor person
stakeholders.
or some low-grade salary worker to actually come out and change this. The people who are supposed to change this are actually the beneficiary of this very
absolutely.
system. So the change is nearly impossible when you have a donor-based structure which is in place, which is actually benefiting to those same people who are supposed to change it.
So your thesis in terms of your postulation in the book that you have written, How Pakistan Became a Nation Tiger. So it is about changing the political structure to start with, right? And as a consequence, things will begin to change in terms of governance also. So you're talking about networks there, you're talking about people with a thought process. They come together to affect that change. How do we see that happening? Or do
I
we
think
not
quite
see that happening?
frankly, no, we should, because quite frankly, the only way to develop, I don't know, Hussain, you can talk to this too. I think quite frankly, no country has developed unless it goes the route that you go.
Yeah.
Development is by nature an innovative process.
Yeah.
It has to be a process. We all want to get to the same goal. But how we get there is important. And how we get there is by doing our own innovative thing, by carving out our own niche in the world, doing something. If you keep following others, you can't. And here, I think, Hussain, you should talk to us that, look, if we continue to follow this path, right, what are we learning? What are we gaining? Because as far as I can see, these donors, when they leave, I don't even see anything that they leave behind. We don't even have
But
facilities.
they haven't brought in anything in the first place. So what are
Let's
they gonna
not
leave
take
behind?
my word for it. Let's talk about the USAID's own report, the recent report in 2017 they published on. It's titled actually that USAID development goals have not been able to met because of short-term political goals of State Department. And it's a beautiful report. I mean, one thing I love about the donors, specifically the Americans, I can't talk about the others, British as well, is that when they actually do their M&Es, monitoring and evaluations, and when they do the report,
But that's a
they're
continuous
actually
process,
critical.
right?
They write what is true. They don't try to fudge the data like we do. They don't try to have a flowery language which is trying to project something else. They present the reality what it is. 2017 report of USAID, it is clear that under the Kerry-Lugar-Berman Act, the promises and the development goals that were supposedly projected, none of them were able to be met. None of them. And the reason they stated, one of the big reasons was that the development goals of Pakistan were compromised because of the short-term political goals of the State Department.
Not Pakistan, State Department.
State Department. And
US.
this is their own report, which is so telling when we talk about it. The funny part is that when people like me or Nadeemul Haq Saab talk about it, or any other person in Pakistan, it is labeled as conspiracy theory. That somehow these people are delusional. This is one of the new tactics, not new actually, an old tactic of the neo-colonial and the imperial past to somehow silence the voices of the locals as conspiracy theorists because we are somehow saying. But this is the USAID talking about. That the aid has not been able to
But that
implement
seems to
any
be
goals. So what are they leaving behind?
almost every donor who's put in money. We know that DFID put in about over $1.2 billion in
They have.
education.
They have.
Right? And where's the impact? Right?
The impact, look, I don't blame the donors. Our efforts of the government need to be complementing the donors' work. It's not that the donor can do all the work for us. Unless and until we don't have the ownership of the donor projects. They can provide us a prototype model that, look, this is how it is done. You take the ownership. The problem is that we are not taking the ownership. We need to show and showcase a lot of times that, look, this is how much we're doing in education. For instance, in Punjab, in the last government, a lot of work happened, but there was a lot of amplification of that work. There was marketing. I mean, they hired a consulting firm practically to do just marketing around that. So when the goals are political, then we're really talking about politics and not development. And these are two different things. You need to depoliticize development agenda unless and
That's an
until you don't do
interesting way to look at it, in saying you need to separate politics from development. How can you? Isn't politics about people? Isn't development about people?
and it becomes about elections more so. I mean, it should be about people, but when it comes to the point where the development is being done for short-term political clout, I mean, half of the time when we look at the CPEC data right now, the idea of having 3 routes was partly and parcel because the two of the routes were
There were
supposed to go
political
to Punjab.
dimensions to it.
There was a political dimension. So you're essentially buying loans from China to do what? To increase and enhance your
Again, we
political
come back to
capital in the
that
country.
same old political structures, right? Where you want where you want to be in public service because you want benefits for yourself. You want to extract more and more, right?
So the
Rent
point
seekers.
is, politics is very important. All of life is politics. Humanity is politics. Aristotle was right when he said man is a political animal. But the path that the world has found is that you must do things technically, even though some decisions may be politics. I'll bring you to this, for example. Take any corporation, and you know many corporations, unlike us. Any corporation, the board is where the politics happens.
Yes, that's true. Not in
Underneath,
the
there must be clarity of purpose and you know what you're doing. It's the same thing on our projects. If you want to build Bhasha Dam, the goal can be set by the politician, but after that it's a technical question. Same thing as Shabaz's metro. The goal should have been, hey, build public transport. After that it's a technical decision. That's why we built the planning commission. But we deviate from that, and part of the reason we deviate also is because the donors make us deviate. Now another thing that I'd like to draw your attention to, which is very crazy, which nobody knows about, Faisal.
We need to take a short break. So while we take a short break, have a walkabout, maybe make yourself another cup of coffee, and we'll come back and we'll discuss this even in deeper depth and see where the problems lie and what can we do to change things around. Thank you for staying with us at the coffee table. So before we went away to the break, we had Dr. Nadeem, right, telling us what kind of issues we're still facing. So let's pick it up right from there.
You see, what I wanted to ask Hussain was, which is a very important question, 2 questions actually. One is, Is the Pakistan government even aware of these contracts and where money is going and who's putting money where? The second related question is, does the Pakistan government know, for example, what the work agenda of DFID, USAID, World Bank or whoever, does the Pakistan government know what their work agenda is, who their contractors are, where the money is going?
I think it's not that Pakistan government doesn't entirely know. They have a broad idea, but they don't understand the politics behind these ideas.
Do they understand the specifics?
The
For example, do
specifics
they know how much money has been given to contractor A?
You see,
And what is the agenda?
That I doubt.
That's problematic. I mean, you see, specifically after the KLB Act, what happened was that the US aid and the US State Department was allowed to directly fund INGOs, NGOs in Pakistan, which is what caused a major anxiety within the security
All donors do
establishment.
that. It's not just the USAID. Everybody does it.
Everybody's doing that.
Yeah.
What happened eventually was that because of that, the entire visa controversy also started.
Yeah.
You had 10,000 visa being stamped. The agencies were going around running after who's who and who's not an agent and who's actually a development aid worker. If you remember, a very unfortunate event happened that Warren Weinstein, he was a development aid worker in Lahore and he was
I knew him well.
kidnapped. He was kidnapped. I mean, this is one of the factors where we have security in development. The research I'm doing is the integration of security in development, how certain imperial powers, including the US, uses the cover of development to actually run
Further their security
covert
agenda.
operations. And this has been going on
Their
for a
imperial
long time.
agenda.
We have paid our price because of that in terms of polio vaccination, in terms of the hepatitis campaign, etc. So that issue is there. What happened after the KLB Act was that there was a certain surge of aid in Pakistan, which even the government of Pakistan didn't have the institutional structure to manage, which is why they had a separate entire ministry, EAD, specifically to manage the aid. But the problem again is that as good as competent as the government of Pakistan is.
Look at another way.
Okay, let me ask you one thing.
Yeah.
So, when you talk about capacity so there is obviously you have to have capacity to be able to spend that money also and justify the spending. So if that capacity is not there, then you're going to have these anomalies where you have 7.5 billion supposedly coming in and you only get about 1.8, out of which a major chunk never comes to you, right? It just goes across the
No,
Potomac.
Faisal, sorry. That's not our capacity.
That's their capacity as well.
Their capacity.
They
They don't give us the money.
Right.
Remember, what you must understand, which people don't understand.
Yeah.
Aid money never, very seldom. Sometimes. For example, IMF is the only money that comes to the government directly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? The other money...
That comes straight directly to the state bank.
it goes to the state bank.
Right.
IMF, in fact, I'll tell you a very unusual thing. IMF doesn't have a bank account anywhere in the world.
Right.
IMF only puts money, one bank account in the US, but that's different. Everywhere else it doesn't have a bank account.
Okay.
It just puts money directly to the central bank department.
Right.
Right? But here now, all the donors don't give money to anybody here. They give them to their contractors.
Okay.
The contractors are the Beltway bandits and their
Right.
cousins
The contractors
around the world.
have control of
They
the
get all the money, and then they decide how much will come here. And I think my calculation says maybe 30 cents on the dollar come here, the rest they keep. But even more important is that, Faisal, we make plans.
Yeah.
We make plans. Your 11th plan or your, whatever that, Vision 2025.
Yeah.
Does the Planning Commission know how the agenda of the donors fits in with the Vision 25 or does not fit in the 25? Is there a kind of reconciliation ever done?
I think on some level it does, but it is at a very surface level. You don't know the nitty-gritties because, again, the point
But
is
do
not
the
that-
donors come and present their agendas to you?
No, that doesn't happen.
Why not?
I mean, that's for the government to actually decide. It's not that the government is asking and they're not giving their agenda.
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I tried that. When I was the deputy chairman, I
Yeah.
asked all the donors, I said, please come and present your agenda.
Right.
Because quite frankly, we've got a strange dichotomy which we shouldn't have. Planning Commission does the economic planning, EAD handles the donors. So EAD handles the donors means that the donors go to EAD directly. So
EAD is the Economic Affairs.
Economic
Economic
Advisory,
Affairs,
Economic Affairs Division. It has no human capital to manage the donors. It's supposed to be only a protocol body, but it acts way beyond. And then the Ministry of Finance wants more money, so they're willing to sign anything they can.
Right.
With the result, those guys can spend their money anywhere.
And this is a DMG Babu
This is right.
who's making all those
Absolutely,
decisions.
who's doing this. Second thing is, in the Kerry Lugar Burman, I spent personally 3 months every day with those guys trying to pin them down to where they were spending money.
Yeah.
Man, we could not get them to get pinned down. They had money that they were spending wherever they like. So I'll tell you, we don't know what's happening. Secondly, when I called the donors and I said, guys, why don't you come and present what you're doing? to the people of Pakistan, not even to me. We have a hall downstairs, we'll have an open meeting where all the donors, the people need to know. All the donors can come one by one and present your agenda. Just tell us what you're doing in this country. We don't want any of your secrets, but just tell us what you're doing in this country and tell us what development
So this is our country. We need to know what's
Just
happening
tell us
there.
what your development goals are and how they are meeting our development goals. We've signed the MDGs at that time, SDGs now. Just tell us how you're affecting the MDGs. The donors were very upset. They didn't want to come. EAD was very upset. When some of them came, we found that they didn't have really an agenda, and we couldn't even hold a good conversation with them. Did you find that at all or not?
I think on some level, yes, it was there. I thought the donors in Pakistan that were being operated, at least in 2013 and 14, they were very lost, if I have to use the right word. The direction was completely all over the place, like you mentioned, and you couldn't pin them down what exactly is needed. Some of the projects were at a very superficial level, I mean, with no results, nothing. But I think the focus again was not on the delivery part. Half of the time, I will not name any donors over here, but there were donors that would come up to us and tell us that, look, we have $8 million to spend. We need to do this before the financial cycle. Here is what we will do. We will bring you 4 consultants from different parts of the world, IMF, ADB, etc., and they will work for you and develop a report. And I would not understand what the purpose is. What I rated on...
The purpose was to take those $8 million.
The purpose was to actually spend on the consultants.
Did you find the report useful?
Not at all. Not at all, because I think the report was actually, I mean, it's the wrong thing to say, but it was a copy-paste from a similar report that was done in Vietnam.
How many reports did you find in the planning that you got through these donors that you found were very useful?
I have a thing for reading. So I used to read up a lot of reports that were stacked in Planning Commission and all that. Interestingly, all of them were practically copy-paste of similar material over and over again. And at times I would realize that why did they even have to write this all over again?
Are these reports published?
They're published in a booklet.
Yeah, but they're never really peer reviewed, never really brought out.
Not peer reviewed. It's stacked in the library.
Why not?
Not even government officials are going to read it, so I don't assume that anybody would be interested to publish it for the wider audience. I mean, this is one of the things that as well, that for the last 10 years
what
of
are
data...
the universities for? What do they do research on? Right?
If you're doing any research on public
I've
taught at a university, the universities are at even a worse situation right now. I mean, we have universities operating as government institutions.
So how are we planning? We're not planning at all, right?
In my day, we didn't. Ask Hussain.
I think we've the university professors and the deans want to be bureaucrats. The bureaucrats want to be the politicians. The politicians want to be businessmen. The businessmen want to be.
So this is just a
very well put. I like that. I like that characterizing. This is very good. You must remember that, Faisal.
Yeah,
this is great.
Remember that.
Everybody wants to be something
else.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like Midsummer Night's Dream. Huh? but listen, there's another bit of the donors that I don't understand at all. Faisal, you know what they do? They have advocacy programs, which obviously benefit the media.
I've seen a lot of those.
What is an advocacy program? And tell me...
I'm going to tell you what you already know.
Tell me, would Australia allow an advocacy program? Pakistan government set up an advocacy program in Australia?
Advocacy programs are basically to write an article and tweet in favor of a certain donor agenda. I mean, whether anybody likes it or not, that's exactly what advocacy program is. And unfortunately...
No, but they also give big money to the media to put in ads.
That's what I'm talking about.
Obviously.
It's basically a branding campaign, media and PR.
Given the state of media these days, should we expect more advocacy programs, or
I think they've died down because the USAID has kind of taken a back seat, and I think it has been a very good reason.
So the USAID is the largest donor then?
In terms of the development aid, yes, USAID has been present in Pakistan for the longest time, gives out the largest dole of money. But I think that they're also pushing back now, and I think it's good as well. Partly because the aid was, like we've already mentioned, the aid wasn't coming anyway. So the idea that they're not going to give aid anymore.
So what's going to happen to our think tanks? No money coming in?
I'm not sure we have think tanks or not, but the problem is the small-time NGOs that are being set up.
So what's going to happen to them?
The average people of Pakistan will not be at risk. The only people who will be at risk will be these Islamabad-based donor consultants who are charging exorbitant amount of money, and that is where the problem is. But I think I don't blame them. I think that these are really smart people, really smart consultants. The government of Pakistan needs to have a way to induct them within the government, so that, I mean, they have to pay the bills as well. So if they end up being with the donors, I think the government of Pakistan should have a way where they can induct and use these people for something better. I mean, we're talking about the capacity. We do have the capacity. The same people are doing work for the donors for whatever little they're achieving. So that could be utilized for the Pakistani government.
Solution. How do we cut this Gordian knot? It is obviously a Gordian knot, right? It's not going to be unraveled very easily, right? So what do you do? What is the one thing that you can possibly do? You've been there in the Planning Commission. You've been there.
One thing that we can do.
Before I ask, is the Secretary of Finance more powerful than the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission?
Oh, yes.
Huh?
So
should it be like that?
Secretary is Finance.
So should it be like that?
Secretary of Finance, let me give you a little secret, runs the government.
It runs the government.
He
That's what I
is
thought.
actually the most important
That's what I
man in
thought.
the government, right?
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
absolutely.
He
Without
is
a
the
doubt.
most important man in the government.
Right.
Every secretary looks up to him.
Yes.
Every minister looks up to him.
Right.
Even
He
the
writes the
prime
checks,
minister. Even the prime minister. No, because he's the only guy who can write checks.
He's the only guy who can
Nobody
write.
else can write checks in the government. Nobody else can write checks. Right?
Secretary of Finance is where the power center
Right.
is.
The way to break the Gordian knot, again, Hussain,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong. My advice is build up our own universities.
Yes.
The Planning Commission must dedicate, to my mind, at least 1% of the PSTP, if not more, right? At least 1% of the PSTP must be dedicated to research.
Acronyms, you've got to flesh it out for our
Public
audience.
sector development program.
Public sector development
1% of a public sector development program.
Yeah.
Even more if we can,
Right.
must be dedicated to research
Yes.
and given to universities to run.
Yeah.
I would say even more than that. But then we have to figure out how to spend money.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, we build these funds, like you will
So
recall.
we take the pen away from the Finance Secretary?
I don't know. That's not the only thing.
Okay.
I think if you will recall, we had NDFC, we had PADC,
Yeah,
we had
we do.
BICIC, and you know what happened to
Yes,
them.
yeah.
So we set up these things, and unfortunately, we as a people don't now know how to create competitive and innovative ways of spending. You're trying now. I
Yeah.
hope we can learn from you,
Yeah.
right? But the question is, if we can set up what you, I mean, I think that's a good way to think about it. Your incubation center, if you've got something, what you're doing, if you can have something similar in universities to develop research, we must become an idea economy.
Yeah.
If you're not an idea economy, someone else will come and fill up the space. What do you think,
I agree.
Hussain?
I mean, I'll just add to this thing. I have two things to say on this, specifically the way forward. I'm a political scientist, big history buff. Pakistan is still, one thing we need to realize is that Pakistan is still a young country.
Yeah.
70 years of history. If you look at other countries,
Sure.
70 years, the US
nothing.
was still fighting a civil war.
Yeah,
So we're still a young country. We're evolving. Now, with that in mind, the second thing is that we need a disruptive change. Major changes around the world in different countries have not come through a sort of negotiation.
It's not incremental.
bargaining.
It has to be disruptive.
It has to be disruptive. And we're living in a place where we cannot wait 10, 15 years like a lot of people are saying that
Because
we should give
pace of
time
change,
to...
pace of change is
Pace
also
of change
you know,
has
is a,
changed.
the
I'm
delta is
sorry,
much steeper.
Disruption to me is a kind of a scary word. Are you talking about a revolution? What do you say?
No.
So what do you mean by
Disruptive
disruption?
changes is actually we need to shake the system. The mindset has to be shaken. Now, if we continue to like do these capacity building programs, spend $10 million here, $30 million here, sporadic programs, doing work in silos, nothing is ever going to change. And this is one of my advice to the Prime Minister of Imran Khan
Are
as
you
well.
saying something like Tariq-e-Labbaik should come and change, disrupt the system? I mean,
That is too much of a change that will be good for us.
Okay.
But we need to shake up a particular system in a way where we need to take bold
Let
decisions.
me table,
We cannot just
let me table an interesting thing.
Okay.
here. So we have a population getting younger and younger.
60%.
Right? 60%. So we have a big advantage, right? Because they'll be far more fearless. They'll be far more experimental. They will want to do things differently. Hopefully, they'll want to do new things. The flip side is that if we don't get it right, this is going to be a big millstone around our necks, right? So what do we do?
I think there is no flip side on that. The population, 60%, a lot of people say we can use it for advantage, otherwise it's going to create a havoc.
Yeah.
Even if it creates a havoc,
It will still be
it will
positive?
still come out the positive way. So I'm very optimistic about the future of Pakistan, specifically because we have English-speaking 60% youth bulge which is getting angry,
Yeah.
and they need to be
They
angry.
want to change things.
We need to be very angry
You
because
are
things.
going in a direction I don't like. Anger and disruption both. I mean, combining those
He's
two
an
sentiments is a
economist.
bit worrying. Come on. I have to
I-
believe
I-
in stability and
I'll
equilibrium.
I'll wear the academic hat and lift the political hat. So the right ways to probably use is that we need to be passionate and we need to be a little bit more innovative, not disruptive. So
And
I'll
I think we need to be less afraid of failure also, right? So we need to do things in a different way and see how that works out.
You see, for the government, they need to be taking the bold decisions. I've worked with the minister, I've worked with the politicians, I've had friends who are working in the government.
I mean, this is
The problem over there is that the decision making
it's an extremely
is so
interesting
much,
discussion, but I've got to wind up because we're running out of time. So you've been part of the conversation we've been having around the coffee table. We will pick it up again at some point in time. I think this merits much more, not just the aid side, but how we do things, how do we govern things. So please do join us.
But let me also say very briefly before I think all of our audience, including you, Faisal, we must begin to reconsider aid. And we must not celebrate every time we see our ministers borrowing, our government borrowing. We must
Borrowing is
also.
different from aid. Hang on.
Well, okay.
It's different from aid. So we'll talk about
I'll let
that
you
in
get
a
away
moment.
with that
Yes.
right now. But the point is, every time our ministers are begging, we should now really relook at that. And we should say, hey, begging is not a good thing.
No.
There's no such thing as a free.
We'll catch you tomorrow. Otherwise, Dr. Nadeem won't let us get away. Thank you for being with us today.